Thank you, everybody who's here. And for those of you who watch this as a recording, I appreciate you taking the time to pay attention to what we've got to talk about today. This is, oops, get rid of that. Inclusion in Action, a recipe for disability hiring success. And I'm really excited to be able to provide some context to the success that happened at Procter Gamble in Auburn, Maine. It was an initiative that I had the opportunity to come and visit several times and get to know the players. And I'm just thrilled to be able to bring them together to discuss how they created what they created, and be able to take questions from audience members, and we can just go from there. So with much less further ado, I'm going to ask David to introduce himself, and then we'll have Wendy introduce herself. So David.
All right. I'm David Bartage. I worked at Procter Gamble for about 36 years. I'm now retired, and I worked up in Auburn, Maine from 2006 to 2014. We produced tampons there, and again, I was a finance manager at the site, and that'll come into the part of the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you. And can you just tell me a little bit, before we get to Wendy, can you just tell me a little bit about the vision of the initiative at the Tambrands facility?
Okay. Well, again, being the finance manager there, we had just gotten approval for a customization to mix regulars and light and super tampons together in one box. They used to just come separately, and so it was a manual effort to make those changes. So we wanted to put in a customization center, and I got funding for it in April 2010. I got a phone call from my manager, who's in our headquarters in Cincinnati, and he said, "David, guess what? We got the funding, and how are you going to staff this?" And I said, "Well, geez, I'm not HR for one, and two, I hadn't thought about it because we hadn't had the facility approved, or the center approved." And he went on to talk about work that Walgreens had done in Anderson, South Carolina, in terms of hiring people with disabilities. And he said, "David, I've got a clip I want you to see. It's from NBC News, who's down there. Please watch it. It'll take about 5 minutes to watch. And then can you go into the plant manager's office and try to get her involved and look into possibly hiring people with disabilities?" I said, "Sure." So I downloaded the video, watched it, and then walked down to the plant manager's office. And by the time I got down there, 5 minutes, 6 minutes later, he had already called her and had gotten her somewhat enthused. And then I showed her the video, and we started planning from that point on. Really, we're kind of ignorant. Our plant manager was from Mexico. I'm the finance manager in terms of the whole disability hiring initiative, and we just started to figure out what are the next steps. In my mind, I was thinking, well, Goodwill or whatever. I know they have people with disabilities we could possibly hire. We could call them up, and who else is there? How do we do this? And that was my initial thought. Of course, we did talk to our HR people, who also said, not quite certain. Let's reach out to Pathways and Goodwill and see where we can go. And that's where we get Wendy involved. She was able to set us up, but it was just one thought, one person saying, "How are you going to staff this new facility that's happened in April 2010, where we got the approval and the initial one person just saying, how are you going to staff it?"
That's awesome. Well, and I love that it's a staffing solution. I mean, it's got a new operation, got new something going on, but having one person with that impetus of saying, "Hey, have you seen what other people have done that might be different or whatever?" So Wendy, yes, I'll bring you in. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and then if you wouldn't mind, just a little background and how you got to David.
Absolutely. Hello, Wendy Jordan. I was hired by a small agency named Pathways in Auburn, Maine. And I initially was hired as a supervisor for employment specialists, and then went on to get an employment specialist certificate, and how I met my many people that were brought on to this game, and it was just wonderful. So I received a call from Jody Eller from Procter Gamble saying they had a project coming up, and they needed help with staffing. And I knew that it would be much bigger than our small agency. I felt like we were a spoke in a very large wheel, and we had to early on call our state partners. And so really that's how it began.
Awesome. And had you had any contact with Procter & Gamble before Jody reached out to you?
No.
Okay. So it
Not
was
at
just
all.
felt like it was out of the blue. David, do you know how you found Pathways?
Well, actually, we're probably looking online in terms of who were service providers. And again, it was Goodwill and Pathways. And I know I've went to a couple of the facilities. It may have been Goodwill facilities, or one of them may have been Pathways. And it's like, well, we're looking at hiring a number of people. Don't know if it's going to be 20 or 15 or what the number was going to be. And we're going to have shifts around the clock. And what can you do? And I remember sitting in an office, probably it was Goodwill, where they went ahead and there were 8 people sitting around a table stuffing envelopes for 4 hours a day. And I was trying to figure out how this could work with our manufacturing facility at Procter & Gamble, and saying, I don't think this is the right fit. And then, I know I reported back to Jody Eller, who was the HR manager at the time, and she started making, the phone calls and reaching out broader. But it was, who are the local agencies who could possibly do something. We didn't know where to begin. I really didn't know what the state had to offer. It hadn't even crossed our minds. So it was just, who are the local agencies?
That's where
And
enclaves were very, very active, in which are no longer in the state of Maine, where businesses hired a group of individuals with disabilities with no one that was non. And so that was, gosh, you said 2010. I can remember Pathways during that time did have a workshop, if you will, with several different employees, employers and products within that. So I think I recall that.
and then one of the things I know about your story is that, Wendy, you got connected with David and you understood the vision and said, this is bigger than what we can manage. Can you tell me a little bit about that and any pushback you got from your leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, being a small agency, and gosh, they were in business for many, many, many years. And I knew it was much bigger than what we could handle with our folks. And our president really wanted to have it as a Pathways project, if you will. Again, knowing that it was way outside the scope of what we could handle, I contacted Voc Rehab. Peter Diplock was the supervisor at the Lewiston Career Center. And he then contacted Valerie Oswald at Department of Labor, at Commerce in Augusta. And there were other folks involved from Department of Human Services, Lisa Sturdivant, and a few others. So we have DHS, we have Voc Rehab, and then we had DOL, which was obviously the big one of VR. And so it was having a roundtable discussion and really seeing what the vision was for the Flexicenter at Procter & Gamble. And for me, I didn't see limitations. I don't see limitations. And it was creating a plan that would work for these individuals that want jobs and have not been able to have the opportunity for gainful employment. So that's a piece of it. And, then going to finding out where the resources would come from and, funding.
Right.
And it was quickly funded. I stepped outside of my role at Pathways and then had an office over at Procter Gamble so I could really set this up.
Awesome.
So, looking back, the president of Pathways really wanted it as just a Pathways thing. I didn't agree with that. And we had a roundtable discussion. I was, I call it risk taking. I was willing to take the risk. It wasn't about just our agency. It was much larger than that. And so if you'd like me to go ahead and tell you what I did at Procter & Gamble to set that up, I can move forward with that conversation.
I'm going to jump over to David for a second just to see who all he had to wrangle together, because you've had to wrangle a whole bunch of people to get it moving. David, who all did you need to bring in aside from Jody and HR, or did you guys, and how difficult was it to wrap your heads around? Because this was a very different employment model for Procter & Gamble.
Right. All right. So what we had to do was, it was a lot of HR, which is a lot of Jody Eller work. But then we had this facility that wasn't even there yet. So it's like, okay, we had to do both. And somehow I got wrangled into trying to coordinate both and get them on similar timelines. So I had to work with engineers and so forth. And our engineers then had to do research in terms of what sort of equipment do we want. We have conveyor belts that you can adjust height. We need stations where you can possibly sit, stand, or lean, or whatever you may do. So we're trying to build that into our design. And we, again, it was just kind of, what did we find out, or what did we find out from some of our contractors? Again, it might have been something we should have gone and asked the state or somebody else about, but we just kind of did it on our own and word of mouth. And I guess there is universal design specialists now that found out on the back end, but didn't know that then. From the standpoint of HR, it was a lot of work, with the legal, with purchasing, what do we need, how do we employ these people? And then a lot of benchmarking with what does P&G do at other sites. Wendy had mentioned enclaves, and found out we had 2 or 3 sites that P&G that would hire somebody to come in, a group come in for one shift, and then they'd leave, and it's like, okay, we know about this now. We've learned we don't want that model. We saw what was done. We traveled in mass to Walgreens down in South Carolina. Brought some of our partners in the state with us, along with the engineers, some of the management out of our headquarters in Cincinnati, and then the plant management, and just try to understand what was involved. I went back and started rereading some of the notes, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of time spent with legal and HR at our headquarters trying to coordinate, more than I guess I understood at the time. And I sit there and say, I've got to give our HR manager some credit there for going well above and beyond, because we didn't have a hiring model. And what she was able to do in terms of how do we hire people, and she found some sort of retail store model where P&G, Procter & Gamble would go ahead and stock end shelves in the stores, and how did we hire those people? And she used that model in our manufacturing facility, so that it worked out very well. So it was, purchasing was legal, and very late on in the game, like a week before we opened up, We actually found out, we should have included our disability inclusion lead officer. She didn't find out about it until a week before we started it up, but it all ended up being good. But we tried to make sure we had informed everybody what we were doing.
Yeah.
But the brunt of the work with there being at the plant, it's like, let's do what we can and just share what we need to at that level.
Yeah, I think that there's a perception that large corporations like Procter and Gamble are such a running machine that everything's going on, everybody knows about it all, but really it's different components of a company. And so within your shell, you guys did what you could at your facility level because that's how you're used to working, and not realizing that there were things you could connect to internally, because there were so many other things that you could have connected internally that wouldn't have helped you at all. So I think it's such a cute story. And I just want to get into this recording. Procter & Gamble traditionally hires everybody through a temp agency, and that was not the model they wanted for employing people with disabilities, because they wanted some stability. They wanted to see what Walgreens had done. They saw those results from having the individuals actually be their own employees. And so that's why it took a long time to find an employment model to follow, because Procter & Gamble traditionally just didn't have that hiring relationship. So Wendy, I'll let you talk about from your side, how did you get things together?
Sure. So after the point of having that roundtable discussion, it was really meeting with Voc Rehab and the Voc Rehab counselors to find out what their pipeline was, if you will, and how we were going to really fast track it. Because what happens is with Voc Rehab, they have a bunch of people that are coming in to do intakes for employment to see if they're eligible and what types, what their skill sets are. And then, individuals that are still seeking employment, and they're assigned providers that will help them, employment specialists. And so in essence, we were reassigning providers, which was now pathways. And if they needed long-term supports, they would go back to their original provider. So really setting it up was meeting with the Voc Rehab counselors and Peter Diplock, and then establishing a list of Voc Rehab clients that would be appropriate to do this type of work. And then meeting with each of these individuals. And I think we had a total of 24 that did successfully fill out the application and do the training, if you will, the mock training, and ended up in the live environment. So set that aside, we established who, and then it was setting up meetings with each individual to come to Procter & Gamble. And that, they are a locked down facility. You have to go through security. You have to have the right identification. Then there's PPE involved. You have to have the right protective gear to go down to the floor. They have automated guided vehicles that you have to be educated on. So it wasn't just one little thing. They're coming into a room. There was a lot of moving parts. I guided each individual with, first, what we did was established a area on their ballroom floor. I think that's what they called it. David, is that correct? It was a very large base.
Large wooden floor.
Yes. And we set up a non-working environment. And I established very quickly that taking a picture of every step of the work to be performed was going to be the best avenue to take. So I needed to understand palette patterns, and each product that they had a palette pattern. And so, they had a established book with pictures. And what I did was took a picture of every step from, I can't remember the name of the device that the pallet actually sat on. And so as it got heavier, it got lower. So people weren't reaching. And so it was taking pictures of the how to build the pattern, pallet pattern rather, and using the PPE correctly. And then having individuals come in. And at first I was like, okay, do I do this by group or do I do this with one sole person at a time? And it really depended. We had to play around with that. And sometimes it was 2 or 3 people, sometimes it was just one. And I would have them explain how to build the pallet and look at the pictures, and we would review it several times until they could or were able to successfully do it. And I would say most everybody that went through, and I can't think of any situation where they weren't able to do it. Everybody was very, very excited that they were provided with the opportunity to build these patterns. And after they were able to, we decided with the checklist, okay, they were able to put shrink wrap around it. They were able to put the product within facing outward, things of that nature. They were gentle with the product, so it wasn't damaged. We then went on to the next step, which was they had to do a job application, a background check needed to be done, and also a drug test at that point. And emails is what drove each one of these steps. Once the application was accepted, you would receive an email. So somebody in the client's life the client would have to be savvy with checking email and, pushing the go button for the next step. And so sometimes that took several weeks before we could move to the next step. And that was done actually more than 24 times. So in the background, once individuals were approved, if you will, there was also staff training at Procter Gamble for diversity and learning about individuals with disabilities, the JAN network, some really great resources. And that type of training was provided to all of their shifts. And we tried to make it fun. And we learned a lot about the Procter & Gamble staff and even individuals with disabilities that family members had that worked at Procter & Gamble. And so it really opened up a openness, if you will. It was a beautifully synchronized project that went on. And from that point, it was live, working in the Flexicenter, and then figuring out pace, who needed long-term supports, who didn't need long-term supports, and setting up fade-out plans with the individuals with the supports that would no longer need supports. And also identifying a staff champion that would spearhead the Flexicenter. And there was Sharon, I can't remember her last name.
West.
And then she had, yes, there we go. She was great. And a few other individuals, the leaders on each team or shift. But what happens is people left, and finding that champion on the team again was difficult to do.
Yeah, I think that succession planning is something that's, Wendy, you and I were both job developers, employment specialists at the same time, and it was like that wasn't something that we were taught in our
Right.
field, and so it became something that we learned about in the post era of like, oh, we should have done that kind of thing. So, David, I didn't know if you wanted to give a chance to talk about some of the struggles and lessons learned that you and others that folks at Procter & Gamble who discussed it went through this, because you it just like the learning curve that Wendy's describing of figuring out how to piece all these pieces together and where to bring outsiders in. You guys also had that same sort of journey at Procter and Gamble.
Yes. We had a lot of heartache because it seemed like it could take just one person to say no, and you had to get everybody aligned to say yes, which was really frustrating. And then how do you go about either getting that person to a yes or working around that person, which I hate to say, but we did that a
Yeah.
couple times. Uh, but it did take a lot of effort in terms of, okay, so our HR, some of our HR people in Cincinnati, our headquarters, were saying, oh, we can't do this because of liabilities, hiring people with disability. That was a biggie. It just kept saying, you know, there have been studies done and so forth. It's not going to be the case. And productivity is going to improve, and uh, attendance is going to improve, whatever it may be, retention, whatever metric, and they're all going to exceed what we would traditionally think with a standard workforce. And so we wanted to go ahead and have 40% of our workforce, 33% of our workforce, people with disabilities. And it just, it was like person after person, how do you get them tied in? How do you get them to see the results? And we'll show them, a video of what happened at Walgreens. And over time, we were able to show the results. Once we got up and running, it's easy to see, retention rate, people with disabilities was 96%. Where the other people in that same work area was 70%. And our other people who, worked in staffing type roles, doing customization type work elsewhere in a plant, it was probably, they turn over almost on a monthly basis. So it was,
Wow.
this is a big win, hiring people with
Yeah.
disabilities, and what was done there at the Auburn site. There were learnings in terms of you don't have to be perfect. Just do it. I know
Yeah.
at the day we had set a day we're going to have this grand opening. Had it was local government officials there on August the 11th, 2011, and it's like, okay, is everything set up? And can't come to find out that the day or 2 days before from engineer that one of the conveyor lines wasn't completed. So we could have products coming in, it might be 2 or 3 products, but that fourth one wouldn't be making it into the building. So, we wanted to show the line running on that day. And so we had people in the background with lift trucks and moving stuff manually behind the scenes and then loading them onto the conveyor that was in our Flexicenter. And it's like, you just need to go ahead and just do it. It doesn't need to be perfect. You'll learn. And, within 2 or 3 days, we had it up and running. But a lot of the items we just didn't know. And it's like there were reasons to say, well, should we pause this? And if you pause it and just, then there's another reason somewhere down the line.
Right.
And in hindsight, that was probably one of the best things we did is make it a big deal, have this big celebration. We're opening this Flexicenter because having that date forced us to open up. Otherwise, we would have just put it off.
I
Um,
love that. I just love that that's one of your key lessons learned there is that because that was something Randy used to always say, if it's never going to be perfect, so just do it. But the idea that you guys had this stake in the ground of that date and that just pushed. And I just have to comment on the irony that it's called the Flexicenter because of the way the packages were put together and the design of the product itself, but the fact that it was so flexible for the workers and the systems putting this all together were flexed together. Maybe I'm building too much into that metaphor, but I think that was sort of the key was that willingness to, Wendy, on your side and on the folks that you were working with, that tenaciousness, but also that willingness to figure out how to do it. How do you, teach people a palette pattern? Because I can guess that the people at Procter and Gamble who've been doing it forever don't even remember how they teach it. They're just, they
Mhm.
already know, they just do it. And so that idea of how do you break this down for the individuals is really cool.
I was going to say a lot of the items in terms of the training and so forth, the visual, the pictures and so forth, and because we use that for safety as well in the Flexi
Right.
centers, take pictures of what may happen and what things to avoid and so forth. But that became our new standard throughout the plant. And for the 3, and it might have been the 4 years following the implementation of the Flexi Center, the Auburn site was the #1 rated plant within Procter and Gamble. Worldwide, I don't know how many hundred, 80, 90 plants, in terms of morale and so forth. And people have really bought into the Flexi Center and supporting and learning. And as Wendy had stated, the training wasn't just for people in the Flexi Center. We trained all of our employees.
Right.
So, and we all felt proud.
Yeah, yeah, that's so great. I want to be sensitive to the time, and wrap this up. But Wendy and David, I wanted to give you each a chance to have a few last words, and then if anybody wants to put a question in the chat, we'll make sure we get the answer and attach it to the recording when we send it out. So David, I'll let you go first, and then Wendy.
One of the items one of our HR managers would say quite a bit is you would look back on this as the best and most meaningful work of your life.
Mhm.
And now that I'm retired, I would definitely say that. And you'll be tested many times along the way in little and big ways by others' fears, doubts, and ignorance. But when that happens, you will look back on this as the best and most meaningful work of your life. And the easiest path is to do nothing. And that business as usual means things stay the same. So you look back on this and say, this is the best and most meaningful work. So that's kind of one of the things is we wanted to make sure that, why are we doing this? And it was the best. And I guess I'll wrap it up for me by saying, you're not alone. At the time we did this, we thought we were alone, but there are all sorts of resources. People don't know about them maybe, but they're out there. Inquire.
I love that. Thank you, David. Wendy, last few minutes from you.
Yeah. So, for me, I feel like I was provided a voice for individuals that otherwise wouldn't use theirs or haven't been given the opportunity to. And I feel like with the resources that were put around me, I was able to guide Procter and Gamble and other companies within the state of Maine with how to set this up. We had some very strong individuals that were on the team, as I mentioned earlier. And it's due diligence. It was keep moving forward and understanding there would be roadblocks, but really just really providing and paving the way. And that was I feel like it will be a part of my legacy. And I was so proud to be a part of this as well, as David said.
Thank you. I agree. Moderator, do we have any questions before I wrap this up?
We do not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for attending the session. We had a small glitch in the technology, but we figured that out so that we could get this information recorded, and this will be the recording will be sent to everybody who registered. So I really appreciate everybody's time on this. I just cannot thank David and Wendy enough for telling this story. I think that the partnership between a company that wants to figure out how to do this and the services that some people with disabilities are leveraging to come together to create this kind of magic and this kind of really data run success stories is so important to continue to tell. Because as you said, you didn't know, David, who else was doing this already, except that, I know that you had been given the video from Walgreens, and there's still companies out there, even though we're almost 25 or 15 years later, there's still companies out there that aren't aware of where else they can ask for questions. So I just really appreciate both of you coming in, as well as agencies or people who support people with disabilities, whether agencies, parents, or others, who just don't realize that there are connectors out there that put these things together and really help make success on both sides, the business side and the person side. So again, thank you both very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to the audience for your time and for the future audience of the recorded session. Thank you to the moderator. Really appreciate your time. And I will wrap this up now. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.